Hey guys, welcome to episode 15 of Teens and Faith Catholic Conversations. I'm your host Annie, and I'm joined by my co-host Gianna.
Hey, what's up?
So before we get into this episode, we wanted to start off with our prayer. O Saint Philomena, Virgin and Martyr, pray for us that, through thy most powerful intercession, we may obtain that purity of mind and heart which leads to the perfect love of God. Amen.
Amen.
So Gianna, what do we have coming up this episode?
This episode, we will be interviewing a very special guest, Dr. Dan Stanislowski, who is very good friends with Annie's dad. And he's going to be talking about dopamine since he has a PhD in science. So I hope you guys all enjoy it, and it'll be very interesting.
Yes, it was a really interesting episode to film, like I said in the thing. It was like a science class, but actually interesting. So, yeah, we're really thankful that he was willing to come on because he's so busy because, like you'll hear, he's also the principal at SGG and he's got 5 kids, so he is just a very busy man. So we are
Yeah.
very thankful that he found the time to come on.
I know. Well, he said he teaches some classes too. So it's
Yeah.
like,
And
I
then he
want
has
to
the lesson
hear
plan for
you.
all that. It's like, how do you do
Yes.
it?
Yeah. But
So, Gianna, what have you said? We were gonna try to do this episode unedited, but because we will admit, we do edit a lot of our errors out. So we were like, let's just do this episode unedited. It's gonna be so good. But then I just talked over Gianna, so
no,
great.
I think it's fine. Just keep it in there. Anyway,
Well, we just
so what
talked
have you
about it,
been
so I
up
kind
to,
of have
Annie?
to.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Great question. I've been doing a lot of school. And then we have all, so as you all know, All Saints Day is actually going to be the day that this comes out. So happy All Saints Day to you all. And I do have a funny story to tell about that. So every year, like we've talked about previously in the podcast, we do a All Saints Day party where we dress up as saints and we usually give little speeches. So my little sister Lucy, I had just woken up and it was like 10 because I slept in and I was eating breakfast. So I was like still half asleep and Lucy like stood up on the couch and was like, Annie, guess who I'm gonna be for All Saints Day? And I was like, who? And she was like, I'm gonna be Saint Philomena, just like from your podcast. And then she gave me the world's biggest hug and it just melted my heart. It was so cute. And then I was
Aw.
talking to my mom about it and I was like, did Lucy pick or did you pick for her? And she was like, no, she completely picked Saint Philomena. So shout out to
Aw.
Lucy, that melted my heart.
Lucy, you're so cute.
Yeah.
I remember when she came here, I was like, she's adorable. But
She is. Everyone says that. She's so cute. She's also spoiled because she's the youngest child, but she's very cute. She
yeah,
makes up for it.
that makes sense. Yeah. Elias, my brother Elias, I know that might be confusing since Annie has a brother, Elias, who
We should
is
just like refer to them as like Elias L and Elias E or something.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. My Elias is 12. I mean, you know what I mean. I didn't
Yeah.
actually give birth to him or anything. He's my brother. But Elias and I used to make fun of Bennett all the time because he was the spoiled one. And he really was. If you actually observed what was going on with that child, he was so spoiled. And he would throw like the biggest temper tantrums. And Elias and I are sitting there like, what is wrong with you? Just chill out, okay? You already have like pretty much everything you could ever want. So, but
Yeah, it's a youngest child thing, I swear.
exactly.
So what have you been up to, Gianna?
Not much, just a lot of school, and I've been practicing violin. So,
Yeah.
Eliza and Bennett were out gardening, and then we have a shed right back by our garden, and my mom needed to put something in there, so she gave it to Bennett, and Bennett went over there and opened the shed, and he was like he jumped back, and he was like, Mom, there's mice in here," and my mom was like, "What, mice?" So then she ran back into the house, and she told my dad to take care of it because she's like, "I can't stand mice." And yeah, there was a nest in there. It was a bunch of baby mice, and we did not see the mother. So I was hoping that the mother was dead because that way she can't reproduce anymore. We can kill off all the babies and there
Oh
won't be
man.
any. I
Yeah.
know that's like very diabolical, but I mean, anyone who
They're
is,
mice.
I know it's mice. Like, no. Well, we had an opossum in the yard one time.
Oh my, what?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. If you are scared of mice, you should look at an opossum. Like, they're terrifying creatures. They are ugly, and I don't understand why they exist. But anyway, that's just my opinion.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're so
Uh,
happy in this week's episode, Gianna.
I know. I had a long day.
Yeah, it's like we're filming this. It's like 8:30 on a Wednesday, so we had a whole day of school and life and yeah. Oh, I did do something else fun today. So, I think I've talked about this before. Me and this one woman at our church, Jade, shout out if you're listening. We are starting a little choir with just the two of us, and we were practicing a lot today, and it was our day for adoration today. So me and my family went out to say the rosary. And one thing that, like, if you know me in person, you will know that I do not sing in front of people. Like, I will not sing in front of people. It's a miracle I sing in front of Jade. Like, I do not sing in front of people. And so you're probably like, why are you in a choir? But anyways, so we were at adoration. And I was like, I want to test the acoustics in here. Like, I'm getting really confident in these mass songs. Like, I want to test the acoustics. So I waited for everyone to leave. So I just like sat in the back. And then my mom was taking pictures of our altar because it looks really pretty. And then she left and she's like, Annie, you know you can sing while I'm in here. And I was like, no, just go. So I shut the doors so nobody could hear. And then I sang them. Like I sang, I think, yeah, I was practicing the Sanctus. And then I opened the doors and I almost hit my mom because she was like listening. And I was like, Mom, why are you listening in? And she was like, Of course I'm going to be listening. That sounded really good. And I was like, Okay, well, thank you. But like, why are you listening? Like, I literally waited for everyone to leave so nobody would hear me sing.
Honestly, that sounds like something my mom would do, like in a different scenario. But that's what moms are for, you know.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah. I did want to add one more thing in too. This isn't like really funny or anything. However, I just wanted to make known that the podcast, like like why we do the podcast. Like, we are not looking for any like fame or notoriety while doing this. So, I mean, we have gotten a lot of viewers, and like what Annie was saying when she went down in Ohio, there were a lot of people that were like, "Oh, I love your podcast," and that's great. We love the support because that's the only way we're gonna keep doing this, is if people actually like it.
Yeah.
But we're not looking for any fame or like high praise or anything. So, like, we don't want any of that. This is for God and Saint Philomena, and we're just talking to other teenagers, and also for the past month we've been talking to middle-aged men.
Yeah, we just realized we're having four middle-aged men come out in a row. No more spoilers, that's all we're gonna say, but it's gonna be really exciting
Exactly.
episodes coming up.
Yeah. But yeah, and then we're just like, getting their opinions on things, or like just talking to them about different things, or like with Dan and the dopamine, like he's helping us, giving us all a science lesson on dopamine and what we should or shouldn't do, what we can work on to try to improve and everything. So yeah, this is not for our own fame. We're not looking to get famous or anything like that. So we're not looking to go in Hollywood, but yeah. So just wanted to make that clear.
All right, so now it is time to interview Dan. So the first question we have for you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So I've been a sedevacantist for about 20 years now. Um, and we converted kind of randomly. Not randomly, I mean, God has a plan for everyone, of course. But I was, you know, living the total agnostic, worldly, you know, systematized life, so to speak. And I met a very intelligent man who first, used reasoned argument to convince me of the truth of Catholicism. And then I became a Catholic, which was quite strange, quite wild, actually. And I've been a Catholic ever since. And, in terms of what I do with my career, I have a PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry. I studied in particular what we're going to be talking about today, some dopamine and the things involved with that. I've taken the studies personally a bit, not a bit, quite a bit farther than that, to try and understand things. But then COVID came, and I was already seeing the cracks in the scientific structure, so to speak, and I could no longer just hang out and go with the flow. And so I told the truth, which is has always been something that you get in trouble for. And I had to leave my career in science. Um, but during that time, I was helping the clergy at St. Gertrude the Great kind of form their positions on the COVID questions. And in the process, I mean, I already was quite good friends, but I became pretty good friends with Father Stephen McKenna, whom you've had on your show. And he offered me the position of principal at St. Gertrude the Great School because the principal that was there for over 20 years was retiring. And as I was without a job and, certainly happy to move to St. Gertrude's, I accepted, and I'm now in the beginning of my second year as principal of St. Gertrude the Great School. And I must say, it's a whole different world. I know your podcast is kind of geared towards the mission life. I mean, it is for teens, but um, it's far superior. I'll just say this: it's far superior to live at a place where you get the sacraments every day than it is to be at the mission. I mean, I didn't know what I was missing. We were at a mission for St. Gertrude's for well over 10 years, and I didn't understand the level of difference between getting the sacraments once every 3 weeks and getting them every day. And it is, truly, truly a blessing. I am a very blessed man to be in the position I am in. So, and I'm married. I have a beautiful wife. We have 5 kiddos. My wife is pregnant with our sixth baby right now, and so it's a very, very busy life, but a beautiful one. So.
Yeah. All right, well, that is a really cool background story, and I totally agree with it's way better to be able to go to church and receive the sacraments every day because my family just came to visit SGG, and it was just the greatest week of all of our lives. Just being able to have communion every single day for a week straight, it was so great.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's much easier to be holy. I mean, it's axiomatic. It's obvious, but it is truly much easier to live a holy life when you have the sacraments every day.
Yeah.
So, and we had a great time when you guys were here. That was a
Yes, we did. It was really
awesome
fun.
weekend.
So, since you were talking about being principal at St. Gertrude the Great, what's it like being principal?
Well, it's a lot different than I expected. Not only am I the principal of the school, I teach a full slate of classes for the high school and middle school. And so yeah, it's very, very busy, but great. I'm revamping the curriculum, and then also like on top of that, all the administrative duties as a principal. I mean, truly, there's never a dull day. There's never a dull moment there. Things are always happening, and it is a beautiful adventure because you meet all these great people, and that's another fantastic aspect of it is that you know before I came here, I was working with either in my last job, I was working with all the worldly people, you can imagine that before that I was working with a bunch of Protestants every day, and then before that I was working with atheist scientists all the
Oh
time.
man.
And here at St. Gertrude's, it's only Catholics all the time. I only ever see Catholics. So yeah, all the people I meet are Catholics, and it's fantastic because we're all on this, kind of journey to heaven and to try and get as many people to go to heaven as possible. We're doing that together, and it's absolutely excellent. I love it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It is. I mean, don't get me wrong. It has its difficulties certainly, but it's absolutely fantastic.
All right. So now we're wondering what is dopamine? Like, can you explain it to us a little bit?
Yeah. So, well, can I ask you guys, what do you think dopamine is? I'm actually curious. Like, when you hear that, because it's kind of a term that gets bandied around a lot. So I wonder, what do you think dopamine is?
I don't really know. I think dopamine is like kind of like this, not, I don't want to say medicine, but like something in your brain that like when you see something or like eat something that you like, you just want more and more and more and more of it. So, I mean, that's kind of just what I think it is, but I don't really know what else. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Gianna, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with Annie. I mean, before I thought what Annie thought, I guess. I used to think it was a drug. Just
Mhm.
like just some type of drug that you would get called dopamine, but
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Well, that's pretty close, actually. I mean, it is a chemical in your brain, and it is plays a role in a significant role in a lot of brain processes, neurological processes, and it has this connotation as the pleasure molecule. And Gianna, as you stated, like a drug, it when you know a lot of the drugs of abuse out there and a lot of the things you can get addicted to cause specifically dopamine to be elevated, to be released in your brain. So it certainly has all these aspects to it. It's kind of a misnomer though to say that it is the pleasure molecule. It is certainly much more than that, and nothing in your brain is, by itself. There's lots of other chemicals floating around, kind of helping the processes work. But it is the easiest one to track in terms of what's happening with pleasure, and what's happening with attention and these types of things. So that's really what it is. It gets this connotation as the pleasure molecule. It is absolutely involved in pleasure, but it is a lot deeper than that. And so that's what we'll kind of dig into a little further here. So what like when we talk about dopamine and the pleasure molecule, what turns it on? Like what causes dopamine release to be released in your brain and for you to feel pleasure? Well, what happens is it is released in response to a stimuli in your environment. So a stimulus or stimuli is plural. A stimulus is simply some event in your environment. And by environment, I don't mean like, out in the jungle. I mean like literally right now in our rooms, we are in the environment of our rooms. And anything could happen, like especially a novel, a new stimulus appears, like some strange noise or something that will cause dopamine to be released in your brain, right? And so when that happens, it causes you to pay attention to the new stimuli, all right? And so when you are, so a stimulus that gives you a large dopamine release in your brain is the thing that you will pay attention to. Okay, so now where this becomes really important, especially for teens. I mean, it's important for everyone. I mean, it is just simply part of our body. It's part of our biology, so to speak. But there are certain things that are designed to, and also just naturally give you a lot of dopamine, right? Lots and lots. Um, I think I've mentioned to Annie at least that, foods in particular, um, Oreo cookies, things with like high fructose corn syrup, really sugary things. When you eat them, you actually get a large release of dopamine. And the thing is, when you eat like an Oreo, let's say you've never had an Oreo cookie before in your life, the first time you eat an Oreo cookie, you're going to get a very large release of dopamine. And so what happens then is that large release of dopamine becomes encoded into memory. So you remember how much you liked that cookie. And based upon how much you enjoyed that very first cookie, it's going to cause motivated behavior to get more and more and more of those cookies, right? So dopamine is also therefore largely important in motivation and motivated behavior. Now, there are things that are now virtually omnipresent. I mean, like they're always in our environment now, and these are things that are screens. Um, Certainly, everyone has a phone attached to them. It's becoming part of the human body because we carry them in our pockets, so they're right next to us constantly. And I'm sure we've all seen it. The many adults are totally addicted to screens, totally addicted to their phone, right? Where they will sit there and stare at that thing. Well, the reason is it causes dopamine release. It causes this pleasure aspect where we just want to stare into it and not look away, because to look away from that would be our brain would interpret it as pain, and thus we would want to avoid pain, right? And so when we have something like that, where we are constantly doing the same behavior over and over again to achieve a dopamine hit, so to speak, then that is addiction, right? That is when, I mean, when it becomes compulsive, becomes something, when you're not even thinking about it and you're taking your phone out of your pocket and looking at it. That is compulsive behavior. That is addictive style behavior. And so that is a malfunctioning of the dopaminergic pathway. Now, another aspect of this is, so like some people argue incorrectly that there is low dopamine. People now have what is called low dopamine because dopamine isn't just a yes or no. It's not just an on or off thing. There are things that cause the really high spikes of dopamine release, but there's also this this tone, this level of dopamine that's generally always there to support normal behaviors that we take. So, at any given moment, you're making choices about what you want to do next, right? And for a lot of people who have attention issues, they're not able to focus, especially if they're told to sit in a classroom and listen to some you know math lecture or something like that. It becomes difficult for them because it's not very stimulating, and that's because people who are you know, screen watchers that just watch screens constantly, they are low dopamine because when they're sitting in a classroom, their level of dopamine is now significantly reduced because when they go home, they're so used to this high level of stimulation, that is to say, high level of dopamine release. Okay. And so I mentioned this word already, but it is also attention. Dopamine does control attention. And when you have addictive type behavior, when you're forced to sit in a classroom, your imagination kind of takes over. And the things that you're addicted to, maybe it's sports on television or video games or something like that, instead of focusing on what your teacher is saying, you are instead daydreaming about your favorite NFL player or whatever, and you're just constantly running these scenarios through your head or imagining why we lost on Sunday or whatever it is. And that's because even just the thought of the thing to which you're addicted is more stimulating than what's actually present in your environment, namely the math lecture, right? And so thus you get attention deficit type disorders, and which is why they have most pharmaceuticals for things like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's also ADD, which is just attention deficit disorder, but drugs, pharmaceuticals for those so-called diseases. We won't go into that. But drugs for those, that they target the dopamine system because they try and elevate your dopamine so that it makes sitting in a classroom bearable. It makes it stimulating enough. Granted, it's an artificial stimulation, but that's why those drugs are used for that. Do you have any questions before I keep rattling on here?
No, I'm learning a lot right now. This is really good. Please go on.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So next aspect of this is that you have this attention, right? So your uh, attention and motivation. What dopamine also is a part and parcel to is movement. So a major disease is Parkinson's disease, and Parkinson's is, I don't know if you've seen any videos or know someone with Parkinson's, but they have these really severe tremors, where they can't move. They really sometimes they'll be walking through a doorway and they can't get through the doorway because they're walking from a hard surface onto carpet, and the carpet's a quarter inch off the ground or whatever, and they're not able to get over that. That's because their ability to move has been lost, and it's lost within the initiation of movement in the brain, and those parts of the brains that are dying are dopamine neurons, dopamine eliciting, dopamine releasing neurons in the brain, and thus you get Parkinson's. So we see that it's also a part of movement. And so the last aspect of, like, to introduce this is, excuse me, is behavior. So notice now we have a lot of these mental processes that are going on that dopamine is involved in. And, because it's what dopamine helps aid what we give our attention to, that is to say, what we give conscious thought to. It also, and not only is it conscious thought, and I want to really try, and this is not an easy thing to express or perhaps understand. I'm not that smart of a person though, so it might be easier for some of you out there. But it's also like what you were imagining, especially if you're, video game world or sports ball world, you're giving your heart to these things as well. And that's the emotional aspect, is that people attach their heart, that is to say, also their wills, to um, these high dopamine eliciting behaviors. Okay, and it consumes them. And I argue very strongly that this is a very important aspect of our culture that we have, is that we have a lot of, because how many Catholics are left in this world? There's not that many anymore. And I think a lot of the reason that is, not a lot, that's part of the reason that is because people have become obsessed with these high dopamine eliciting behaviors, and they start to care less and less and less for our Lord and less for truth. And I think it's probably even an issue with many Catholics is they watch, politics or whatever on TV, and the ability of your average news program to elicit an emotional response is, and therefore an emotional a connection of your heart to these things, is far higher than your average religious practice. And indeed, in some cases, I think it's you can get emotional attachment in 5 minutes of watching a Fox News segment than you can in perhaps many months of active meditation. And so this is causing mass distraction, mass inattention, and mass love of the commonplace, the emptiness. And I think it's creating a lot of sadness and certainly sin in our world, and it's a huge problem.
Do you think that people should like stay away from news or like TV or that sort of thing to help with that? Or what's your view on that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. You know, I'm I'm all I think absolutely I wouldn't personally be watching the news. It's really a separate podcast. But I don't, you know, know that the news is informing us with true information. We are certainly getting some type of information, but I don't think it's true. And then it's also like totally dumbed down. But I would say that the medium is the message. There's a few philosophers, this Canadian guy, I can never remember his name, has that quote. The medium is the message. The medium in this case being screens, television. But also there's the cultural Marxists, Horkheimer and Adorno, these guys wrote about this as well, about how it doesn't so much matter what you're watching as it is that you're watching. And so I think Annie's mom asked me this when when they were down here, um, is like, even what if you're watching sermons over and over again? Well, that's great. Do that. I mean, like, I personally am, the spiritual benefits you'll get out of something like that probably far exceed the negative effects of screen watching. However, I think screen watching in and of itself is simply, it's a biological thing. It just causes the dopamine release, right? And so I would recommend, watching and staring into screens as little as you possibly can. It's a tremendously difficult thing in our digital world, where many people, they work in front of computers, right? Hundreds of millions of people work in front of computers all day long, so they must do it. And I think certainly, but I would just, to put a fine point, bow on that, I guess I would say we should just simply avoid it as much as you possibly can. I mean, it does have its uses, it does have its benefits, but I think they're a lot fewer and a lot farther between than most people think. And then I would also say, like at night, um, I would be certainly avoiding it, period, if you can. But if you do have to look at a screen at night, I recommend the orange tinted glasses that filter out the blue light, because it blue light from your phone's effect and your or television screens or computer screens, whatever, it does inhibit melatonin production, and melatonin is the big sleep hormone, the sleep chemical that your brain produces, and so you're throwing off your circadian rhythm, your 24-hour day-night natural bodily rhythm. You're throwing that off when you're staring into screens, and it's a very important thing that you keep correct. As good sleep, not just the length of sleep, but the quality of sleep is also important, because you have got to be getting into these deep REM cycles in order to properly heal your brain. And one who is falling asleep in front of the television every night is setting themselves up for neurological problems when they get older, because they'll be getting the Alzheimer's, Parkinson type dementia sooner than you ought to be. So that's kind of a long answer to, I would recommend avoiding screens as much as is reasonably possible.
Okay. So you were kind of talking about how like it's easy to get addicted to foods like Oreo cookies and stuff. Would you say dopamine is more powerful with like bad screens or bad food?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I would guess that it's food, but food is dangerous in the sense that like the habitual use of it can can kill you over the course of years, certainly. But like I think food gives you the a lot of like the Oreo cookies, not all food, but Oreo cookies. I mean, I think all food is a dopamine does cause dopamine release. It's just that the synthetic stuff, because they design it, they design the processed foods to cause dopamine release. Um, and the high fructose corn syrups and monosodium glutamates, like so that which is commonly known as MSG, the those things cause a massive release of dopamine in your brain, and many foods have both of those in the same time. And just as like I said, like dopamine doesn't act by itself; it's not alone in any of these processes. The main neuron type in your brain is actually glutamate neurons. So monosodium glutamate is a molecule of glutamate with one sodium molecule attached to it. Well, when you put that in water, it comes apart and it's just glutamate. And so glutamate actually is a stimulatory. So it's like an on switch for many parts of your brain, and it's an on switch for the dopamine centers of your brain as well. So they design food specifically to be like drugs. In fact, there are studies that show that things, Oreo cookies in particular, are more addictive than hard drugs are that are also designed to stimulate dopamine release. But where the difference between food and screens is that the screen might not be quite as high as a dopamine elicitor. And I'll be honest with you too, the studies are not, there isn't anywhere near enough studies on the screens and certainly video games. There was, I think, one study I found, and it was from 1998 in Nature. Nature's one of, if not the biggest science papers in the world. And they found that it was that video games cause, I think the title of the paper was literally video games cause dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens. And the nucleus accumbens is just the part of the brain where a lot of the pleasure processes occur, and then nothing after that. Same with television. You would think that, I mean, and that's very strange because everything in the scientific world is studied in unbelievably complex details. I mean, they get into the nitty gritty. It is actually a problem in science is that it is hyper specialized. People focus on such small problems as to be irrelevant. Well, here we have a big problem where we're saying video games and television are a lot like cocaine and Oreo cookies, but let's not look into it. That's kind of what they're showing, which is very strange, actually. But the problem with television is that it's this maybe not as high as releasing as like the Oreo cookies are, but it's something that doesn't have the negative side effects. Because if you were to sit there and eat Oreo cookies for even 30 minutes straight, just shoving your face full of it, you would get sick. Well, with
Hmm.
television, you can stare at that thing all day long, right? And so you can totally zombify yourself in the dopamine process, so to speak, by just staring into it. And so it consumes consciousness and it consumes much of your time here on Earth.
Back to your food thing where all the foods are processed now, or like most of them. Is there any like store or something that you would recommend where we could get foods that aren't processed or like, stuff that's actually healthier for us?
Yeah, I think most stores have things that are good for you. You just have to learn how to read the food labels and see what the ingredients are. And if they, have more than like four or five ingredients, and especially if they get the really long chemical names, then you know that that's probably not good for you, and most food you want to just prepare the food itself, the ingredients. You don't want to be opening boxes, unless it's like, noodles. I mean, most people can't make their own noodles at home or anything, right? But even noodles, you can buy or get good organic noodles that are like three ingredients, right? That you want the very small ingredients and ingredients that you can understand. And you also ideally would want it to be organic. Organic used to mean just normal. It used to be just normal food. Now we have to call it organic because they put all these nasty pesticides and things on stuff. But most stores, if you know where to look, will have the good quality foods for you.
So, like you were talking about how, like, when you watch sermons and stuff, like, that's good for you. Would you say dopamine is more powerful with bad stuff that you're consuming or good stuff?
Well, I will say that the mechanism of this dopamine pleasure induced behavior is something that our culture has totally exploited. They've exploited it to the extent that through it, I believe they have gotten a I mean, not complete, but they have achieved large dominance over human thought and behavior through this process. And in that, again, think of staring into the television. Through this mechanism, they have implanted I shouldn't say they, which is, I mean, there's a they, again, different podcast, but perhaps not Teens and Faith podcast, but a value system has been implanted into people because they love staring at television and whatever, and they love watching their actors and these type of things on TV, right? And so through this mechanism, a whole host of evil has been wrought upon humanity and has turned humanity into a something it ought not to be. So I would say that while these processes can certainly be used for good and are used for good, the overwhelming majority of what it is used for is indeed quite bad.
All right, that's good to know.
Yeah. How do you not get addicted to cell phones? Like how if you're in the cycle of like you use your cell phone all the time, like how do you get out of that?
So, I mean, for some people, it's you just have to get rid of the internet phones, right? You can use it for purely functional things, which is to say, calling and texting. That's it. And get rid of the high definition, phones. Certainly, I mean, it's one thing is the as things become more high definition, it becomes more lifelike, of course, and thus it becomes more uh, inducing of us to look into it, to stare into it, right? Which causes people to become addicted more easily. So I would suggest that, especially if people have truly problems and they can't get it, just cold turkey it, just get rid of the internet phone, go back to the good old calling and texting, right? Um, for others, um, you know, just like you would any other addiction, just try to put active willpower, recognize your weaknesses, and put the phone on a different level of your house or in a different room, that type of thing when you go to sleep. Use a good old normal alarm clock to wake you up, or you know, you have mom and dad come and get you up in the morning, however you have to do it. But certainly don't overestimate your own abilities with things. And yeah, just actively monitor it. You can use they have apps that track how much you use your phone now. You can, start at like say, hey, I'm going to use it 5 hours a week. I'm just, picking a random number here, but I use it 5 hours a week. Okay, next week it's gonna be 4.5, and the week after that, 4 hours, 15 minutes, and just keep trying to whittle it down until you get to zero, or 1 hour. So something reasonable. And certainly, there's, if it's functional, the internet's a supremely powerful tool, obviously. And there's a lot of stuff, that can be used to learn. So like, if you're in classes and you need to use it for learning some subject matter that you're struggling with, that's a functional use. That's a good use. But it's just the frivolous, the pointless, those type of behaviors perhaps ought to be completely taken away from on the phone is how would answer that, I suppose.
So would you say that in like Gianna and I's generation, especially phone addiction and screen addiction is like really bad?
Absolutely. It's really bad in my generation, and my generation is, much of my generation, certainly not all, but much of my generation is raising their children in front of the television. I don't know if you've seen it, but I've seen it a few times where you go to a restaurant and you'll have, mom and dad looking at their phone, and then like the little kids each with their iPads, and then like not only the iPads, but like the full earmuff headphones on too. And it's like I mean, that is child abuse. It is altering the many like perception of reality. I mean, that's another thing I guess I didn't really get into here is that high eliciting dopamine behaviors, especially when presented to you on a screen, they don't present reality to you. They present an altered perception of reality. And if you're getting children used to this high stimulating behavior through which you're presenting media that is giving scenarios that are unreal, but they give you the feel good chemicals in your brain, these children are not going to know how to behave normally in the physical world. And there's actually a fancy term for that. It's called the aestheticization of reality. And that is to say, if you see a scenario of some kind on your screen over and over and over again, 1,000 times, and you haven't actually done that, went yourself through that scenario in the real world, well, it's going to change how you behave in that scenario in the real world. And so it's seeding your consciousness of how you ought to act in the real world. So it is an altered perception of reality, and it is throwing off the normal development of the dopaminergic pathway. So this child is on a pathway this child that stares perpetually in his screen from the age of 6 months is going to want higher levels of stimulation than normal their whole lives, essentially. And so your generation, many of you are on that. I mean, I see, kids younger than you walking down my street together, 11 years old, 10 years old, both of them like staring down into their palms because they're holding phones, like when I was that way, when I was that age and your dad, when we were that age, it was, let's go play sports. Let's go outside and kick the ball around or play hockey or something. But now it's, let's go give our consciousness to the digital beast, so to speak. So it's, yeah, your generation has a much bigger problem with it than mine. And it's probably a downward spiral where should your generation reproduce, which certainly they will, but it will be probably a lower rate. Those children will then also be raised more and more and more into this digital world.
Really interesting because I've grown up with like adults saying, "Oh, there's some kids again, and they're looking at their screens or whatever, even if they just picked it up or something like that, or if they've been staring at it for a long time, and the kids are like, why are they always like on top of me for this?" But with that kind of explanation, it's like, wow, that is actually really bad, and you should get off of that. So it's
Yeah.
just
Oh yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and again, I can't reiterate enough that um, the medium is the message. And so if at a young age you develop this pattern of needing to watch, a movie two times a week, you at a certain point you become an adult and then you want a higher level of stimulation and that behavioral pattern's there, so you want to get into the riskier type of movies and things, and it's just not a healthy um, habit mentally and certainly spiritually. And that's why they even make cartoons for adults now. I mean, like cartoons were there to get kids hooked on TV, but now it's like they they even seed these and they also, by the way, they make, I say seed, they put they try to get away with as much as they possibly can whenever they possibly can. And so they want to put like weird scenarios into child's cartoons, right? And now and now as adults, there's like a whole series, I mean, several series that are like cartoons, but they're like, childish, but very adult in their content. And so they want you to have develop this behavior pattern where you are consuming, and it's totally a passive. It's also the thing about another aspect of this is it's a total passive process. If you see these, when I was referring to the aestheticization of reality, when you are watching a scenario 1,000 times on television, and then and it's especially if it's like a danger scenario, something that requires intervention or you have to help someone. Well, if you see it 1,000 times on screen where you're totally passive, if that scenario were to present itself in reality, the odds are is you're going to be passive. Like someone needs help, they're in a car accident or something. Well, hey, I'm not gonna. I can't. You'll freeze because your disposition is to be just, oh, let it go by. Let the thing pass. Someone else will take care of it, which is another huge issue actually that we have, is we have a lot of problems in this world, but everyone's passive and they think that they can vote their way out of this stuff, for example, where we need active behavior, active participation in the physical, like us, our physical bodies participating in the physical world to stop these things. And we're highly conditioned not to do that. um, so
So, what advice would you have to parents and kids who, well, for example, my family, we have like the only way we can watch sermons other than when our priest is up once a month is we have to go onto YouTube and log into the SGG live stream. What advice would you have for parents who have to use screens to watch?
Absolutely. Yeah, use the screens for that. I mean, there's that's what I mean, I did that for years too. It's what you should be doing actually, right? Is you should be watching mass on Sundays and giving and getting your spiritual communion. I would absolutely advise to do that. That's that's why it's there. Like if the internet were there for no other reason, then you can make a good spiritual communion. That's a fantastic reason. So I would not, absolutely in no way, shape, or form advise against doing that. And I would not advise against listening to sermons and that type of thing. No, and so I in no way, shape, or form. Even if you, I mean, maybe if you're listening to sermons and watching mass for like 6 hours a day, maybe like just listen to it. Don't look too much at it. But I,
Yeah.
I would advise against that, certainly.
Not get addicted to the bad stuff. Like get out of the cycle of that.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
Yeah, you cut
Oh,
out a little.
yeah. How do you not get addicted to the bad stuff? Like, how do you get out of the cycle of that?
Well, certainly avoidance is the first and best means of action. Like just be aware that the dangers are out there, and there are so many. I wish I could adequately express the evil that resides in the digital media world. And it's like the angel of light too. I mean, it's like as meaning Satan appears to us as an angel of light. It is any way that they can get you hooked onto whatever it is, as long as it isn't our Lord, they want you to be hooked to it. Okay, so avoidance is certainly a number one, the best thing. And if you do get into something, you do fall into it, certainly if it's like the first time, well, you know that it was wrong, you know what it feels like, so truly make an assessment of how horrible it feels to violate your conscience and violate, if you did, the laws of God, how horrible it feels to do that for the first time, and just associate in your mind the media with that sensation, that negative emotion, and then, just continue with your avoidance, just put it in the past, and continue on fighting the good fight. Um, so yeah, I would say avoidance, and then, and it's not too much a problem for like the teens that are going to be listening to this podcast specifically. It is a massive problem for teens in general. But if it is like, an addictive type behavior, well, you really got to avoid the triggers. So at the beginning of this episode, I talked about the stimuli in the environment, the things in your environment. And I say that like, and I also incorrectly, I didn't know I'd be getting into this. I didn't want to needlessly complicate things, but I kept saying that dopamine releasing behaviors, dopamine releasing. Well, actually, dopamine is only released upon consumption of reward, or again, consumption, I mean like not just eating, but also visually, like whenever you're doing a rewarding behavior, dopamine's really only released significantly in like the first few times you do it. After that, it actually associates with the stimuli in your environment that's around before you consume rewards. And the classic example of this is the Pavlov's dogs. I don't know if you've heard about this before, but there was a Soviet scientist named Ivan Pavlov, and he discovered that when you presented food to a dog, before you let them eat the food, they would start salivating. The saliva would be coming out of their mouths. Well, he started ringing a bell and then presenting them the food. And he noticed that when the salivating wouldn't happen with the food, it would start happening with the bell, because that bell was a stimulus in the environment of the doggy that would cause the doggy's brain to go, yay, food's coming. And that's actually where dopamine is released. And so then the dopamine motivates the behavior to eat the food for the dog, right? So if you have a problem behavior, it's best to avoid not just the behavior itself. Of course, you must avoid that, but you should also really work at avoiding the stimuli in your environment that is causing the bad behavior. And that can be, I mean, your brain is a wonderfully complex and magnificent thing, and it can associate the many different stimuli with that rewarding behavior. So you really got to pay attention to it. But certainly things like bad friends, bad books, certain movies or sounds, even music, bad music, that type of thing, that leads to the riskier behavior. Like those types of stimuli that cause the bad behaviors ought to also be avoided.
That's really good stuff to know, especially for our generation. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So this question's from my mom. But so like as teenagers know, like our parents are always telling us like eat your veggies because like everything else is like really bad for you. So what advice do you have like for teenagers to like actually listen to their parents? Because I know most people would just be like, yeah, yeah, whatever. But
Um, yeah. So, well, first of all, I mean, it's like you have to listen to your parents. I mean, it's
yeah.
just it's the fourth commandment. It's not really an advice thing, but it is like so. Tying it into dopamine, like you'll notice that even if you find yourself groaning at something that your parents are telling you to do, you should really make a self-assessment, because um, what's happening there is you're desiring something pleasurable for yourself, some other thing that you want to do that satisfies you and your desires more than what your parents are telling you to do. So you really, and again, that is dopamine. Dopamine is because you're desiring the behavior that is pleasurable, right? Again, we talk about the motivation, movement, behavior cascade here. And so you really got to lessen the value of those things you desire and increase the value of the natural order that God put you in, which is to say your household where your parents are king and queen, and you must listen to them. And when you spiritualize those behaviors, you not only get an unbelievable amount of merit for doing that in heaven, that is, but also you become happier because you'll notice that, I mean, there's this, massive misconception about what happiness is in our world too, which is why everyone's not happy, because truly only God can make us happy. God designed us for him, and thus he's the only thing that can make us happy. So you'll find that when you reduce your desire for these pleasurable, perhaps even behaviors you're addicted to, and replace them with the hard labors and stuff that your parents are telling you to do, you will, again, if you spiritualize these things, you will find that those behaviors actually give you the true happiness. And eventually, you will find that they become sweet, they become nice, they become you want to do them more, because you're serving our Lord, and He will reward you, and He will give you peace and untold graces to continue to to continue the journey of perfecting yourself and becoming exactly who God wants you to be.
Good. And for our last question, this doesn't have to do with dopamine, I don't think. But how did you meet Mr. Eberhard?
Yeah, my dad wanted us to ask that.
Well, so I don't know if he remembers some, specific event. Because I see, maybe he's asking me about like some rock throwing thing, and I don't know that that's when we met. Maybe it is, but we knew each other since very early on in elementary school, and there we were good friends. Maybe the event he's referring to, I have a twin brother. My twin brother and I maybe defended Brandon, Mr. Eberhard. But I'm not sure that that's exactly when we met. I think we met before that. But we've been friends for a long time. There was a period there where, just friends groups in middle school and high school weren't exactly the same. But yeah, besides that, we've been friends basically our whole lives. So and I'm very, very blessed to call him my friend.
Yeah, my grandma actually showed me a picture yesterday of you and your twin brother, and then my dad and my uncle, and you guys were like, I want to say like kindergartners or first graders. Like you guys are really young, so that was a crazy picture to see.
Yeah. Actually, my wife showed me that. I think you sent it to my wife and she
Yeah, I
showed me.
did send that.
Yeah, my brother and I used to look a lot more alike, so that was
Yeah.
pretty cool. Yeah, like our little, I think that was kindergarten. I think
Oh, okay.
but I don't know. I have a horrible memory. But yeah, we've known each other a very long time.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, and I highly enjoyed this podcast. It was like a science class, but actually interesting. So, thank you
I
for
know.
coming on.
Me
Well,
too.
And
thank you. Yes, thank you very much for having me. It was awesome.
so that wraps up episode 15, and thank you guys so much for watching.
Yep. And next episode, we will also be interviewing a very special guest, also
Very,
middle-aged.
very, very special
Yeah.
guest. We were
Yeah.
shocked that he actually agreed to come on.
Yes. Yeah. So it'll be a very interesting episode, a long episode, but very interesting. And we
Yeah.
hope you guys all enjoy it.
Yes, I want to tell them what it is, but I'm just like so excited. I want them to be surprised because only like our friends know that he's coming on. So, yeah.
Yeah.
No spoilers. Don't give anything away.
Yeah.
All right. So, as always, God bless and Saint Philomena,
Powerful of God, pray
pray
for
for
us.
us.